Welcome, friends, and we are on the Yoga Sutras, Section 1, Sutra 6. And again, these are the books that we are reviewing as well as additional material. So as a quick review, in Sutra 5, we were introduced to two general categories of the vrittis mental modifications, painful and non-painful, and Swami Satchidananda interpreted them as selfish and selfless. Now we're going to look at 5 subcategories of how to remove these vrittis. We'll start with the Sanskrit. Pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidrashmitayaya. Pramana is correct or right knowledge. Viparyaya is misconception or incorrect knowledge. Vikalpa is verbal delusion or imagination. Nidra is sleep. And shmrtiyaya is memory plus the grouping of these 5. So in other words, what are the 5? They are right knowledge or correct knowledge, misconception, verbal delusion, sleep, and memory. And here I put the 5 and how our various authors interpret them. Most of them are in agreement. Swami Satchidananda calls correct knowledge right knowledge, as does Taimni. Iyengar calls them real perception or correct knowledge based on fact and proof. And Bailey calls it correct knowledge. Incorrect knowledge is also known as misconception by Swami Satchidananda, wrong knowledge by Taimni, or unreal or perverse perception or illusion by Iyengar, and indiscrimination by Vivekananda, or incorrect knowledge by Bailey. Imagination is verbal delusion by Swami Satchidananda and Vivekananda. Fanciful or imaginary knowledge by Iyengar and Taimni. Fancy by Bailey. Sleep is sleep pretty much by all the authors, though it is knowledge based on sleep in Iyengar's translation, and it is passivity according to Bailey. And memory is everyone here. These subtle distinctions are interesting to help us with our various understanding of these 5 ways that the vrittis cover up our true understanding of who we are as the self, first as a soul, but ultimately as the triad or as Atma. And as we learned before, they are painful or non-painful depending upon how we relate to them. So essentially, we are learning that this is a training in understanding how our minds work. And as we do that, we can perceive things both outwardly with the 5 senses and inwardly with eventually the direct intuition, once we understand what intuition really is. And we can learn to discern, are we having correct knowledge, incorrect knowledge? Are we coming from imagination, sleep, or memory? And what is the reason for doing this? Well, one thing that Iyengar says that is interesting to me is that as we not allow these vrittis to disturb our practice, we, quote, develop maturity of intelligence and attain emancipation or liberation or moksha or enlightenment. So the point here, according to Iyengar and many others, is we must learn to train our minds to perceive correctly. And that is the essential reason we are learning these 5 modifications. Something that Taimni says is, all modifications of the lower mind can be classed under one or the other of these subheads, or these 5, and therefore the system of classification is quite rational as we learn to actually make this a practice. Not just a theory, something we're learning that's interesting, but a practice. We will see how these modifications of the lower mind can be brought under control, can be refined, and he's going to say momentarily here, can be uplifted, as he says. Only by learning the technique of samadhi can we move into the higher mind. So the first techniques we're going to learn in the upcoming sutras that Patanjali teaches us how to work with these, but ultimately we need to learn the samadhis to really remove these vrittis, these 5 vrittis that are in the subcategories of painful and non-painful. And another thing that we can understand is that by removing the vrittis, we see that we are developing maturity, intelligence, mastery of the mind, and are becoming capable of entering the samadhi where we realize the self. Bailey at first relates to that as the soul, but ultimately all the other authors relate to that as the triad, or what Bailey would call Atma, Buddhi, Manas here. So we're not going to go through this whole model again. We're just going to refer to pieces of it. If you are not familiar with this, go back and watch some of the other videos. There are many videos that explain this model. But in general, we're focusing on the 2 parts of the mental plane. The plane of the solar angel, where the soul, here we see it over here, the soul, or the causal body, or the egoic lotus is, and the plane of the lower mind, called the lower mental plane over here. And what we are attempting to do is understand that these 5 vrittis, subcategories of correct knowledge, incorrect knowledge, imagination, memory, and sleep, they all exist primarily on the lower plane, the plane of the lower mind. That's what Taimni was referring to. We can only get to the higher plane once we start to learn the initial samadhis. So on the lower plane, we're focused primarily on pratyahara and dharana in terms of the techniques of the Yoga Sutras. When we get to the plane of the solar angel, the higher mental, we're starting to enter dhyana, or meditation proper, and the first samadhis, which again are samadhis with an experiencer. Please watch the other videos if you want to get a better understanding of that again. And that leads us up into eventually the triad of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Atma, Atmic plane, Buddhi, Buddhic plane, Manas, the top point at the top subplane of the mind here. And that's what we are attempting to do. So in the upcoming videos, we're going to look at these 5 categories more succinctly. We're at the end of this particular sutra. If you are watching this on Patreon, please comment and share. I do respond to all comments. I'm happy to have a discussion there. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can also comment there. I do my best to get back to those comments. I don't follow it as much as on the Patreon channel, and I invite you to become a Patreon. There's a lot of perks if you go over to Patreon. Please check us out at patreon.com, Soul to Spirit.